right. Here's my presentation on landscape photography, which it's very interesting how landscape photography has been able to define itself as like its own separate art form, and also like to see how landscape photography used to look, because I'm used to seeing like the very high like contrast, super colorful landscapes that don't quite look real. And not to say that that's not something that is not beautiful or like interesting to look at, but it's come so far from where it used to be, and just the history of landscape photography is far more interesting than I thought it would be. So the top left here is Edward Steichen. Don't know if I pronounced that right. Moonlight the Pond from 1904, which sort of defined landscapes as an art form. He took this photo, and then after like producing it as, I'm not quite sure how he did it, but he like produced it as a photograph, and then he like painted over it. This was originally entirely in black and white, and he added some like blue and green tones, which and it's said that he might have added the moon to it. It might have just been like a not at this time, or like completely dark, and then he added the moon to it to be like, ooh, look, cool moon. And that's sort of the idea of like pictorialism, which was, you know, the movement that was going on at that time. And he described his work as creating scenes and instead of merely capturing them. And I think that this photograph from him like expresses that a lot, because he was, I think, a painter, like primarily, and then adding that to the sorry about that, I'm using my phone. Adding that to the idea of photography was something that was kind of new for the time, and described like truly was adding more creativity to the world of landscapes. And then there was a lot of, so this photo, the bottom photo is Carlton Watson's from Mariposa Trail from 1866, which was from Yosemite, where a lot of people were like gathering support from the general public towards preserving like beautiful natural landscapes. Like Yosemite and then Yellowstone were two places that people were like, they weren't really sure of like the real existence of these places before people like Carlton Watson and eventually Ansel Adams like took pictures of like geysers and stuff, and were like, look how beautiful it is here, like shouldn't we keep it beautiful? And then they were able to convince Congress to be like, oh yeah, this is a national park that we should protect. And there's a lot of famous photos from this time, which isn't so much this, you know, I said that the Moonlight the Pond photograph was describing landscapes as an art form, but this is also, you know, an art form of its own. It's like a different sort of idea of what art could be, but it is in itself a very beautiful, like dramatic looking photo. And I can't imagine like not really seeing anything of like more Western areas, and sort of like not knowing about the existence of these places, and then seeing photos of them and being like, ooh, wow, that's beautiful. So the first photographer I'm going to be talking about is William Henry Jackson, who was alive from 1843 to 1942. And like all the things I read about him were like so impressed about how he was a photographer from when he was 12 to like quote 99, but he really stopped being a photographer at 81 when he quote retired and decided to become more of a painter. A lot of these photographers were also painters, which I think is really nice, because, you know, landscape photography was doing something that only painting could do at a time, where it took like the 3D world and made it 2D for more people to enjoy. He served in the Civil War, and he wasn't really, there's not photos from him when he was in the Civil War. Like, he didn't take photos, even though there were Civil War photographers. So I'm not sure if he was a Civil War photographer or not. I don't think he was. And then he headed west to open a photography studio in Nebraska, which was actually a portrait studio. But he was kind of like, you know, portraits, you know, they're fine, but they're posed. And he said that he would much rather get pictures of people in their in their like quote natural habitat. I keep saying quote a lot. In their like natural habitats. And so he's like, I'd much rather take pictures of people from like interacting with nature and more natural like photographs. So the picture on the left here is one of his more famous ones, which is the Balanced Rock Garden of Gods, which I really think this one's cool. And I enjoy the kind of tannish tones. I don't think it's sepia because I think that's more orange, but I really enjoy the way his photographs look. And I also really like the one on the top, Moki. Not sure about that. That one is really nice. And I think it's really nice how you can there's people on the rocks up there. I think that's cool. He took some of the first photographs of native dwellings. He has so many really nice photos of like native people like gathered in groups, and you can see like their little village behind them, and they're just, it's really nice. And he was like bringing awareness and sort of, not really awareness as much as just public interest towards preserving natural beauty and like all these areas that were so well protected, like Yellowstone, and he was more Yellowstone and some Yosemite. So his most famous photograph is Mountain of the Holy Cross from 1873, which people love religious symbols. They love them. This mountain was talked about a lot in popular culture back then. Like, well, it wasn't like, it was like a famous mountain that people would be like, you know, there's a mountain up there with a cross on it. And people would be like, no. And so he climbed the Rockies to take this photo to be like, hey, look, now you can see this mountain too. And I think it's funny that people were so into this mountain because you can look at it and it's like, yeah, it's a mountain. Next photographer is Ansel Adams, who is still exceptionally well known. And I was looking up some of the prices for like prints of his, and like, oh my God, you can spend so much money on some of his photos. So his family was financially well off, but they lost a lot of money in some kind of crisis. And he was an only child. And he kind of like separated from his family to join an environmentalist like club when he was 17, and sort of just was always really into the idea of preserving natural beauty and like all this, which really, you know, lends itself to taking all these beautiful like dramatic photos of architecture and landscape. So he was sort of more in the Southwest. So the photo Monolith, the Face of Half Dome down there, is one of his more famous, like high contrast, dramatic photos of landscapes in, I think he also was Yosemite, and, you know, they were really into Yosemite and Yellowstone. Like those two places were like really good. And he definitely advocated for photography as a fine art, specifically landscape photography, though he did have photos that were not landscapes. Like there's a really famous one of a rose on driftwood that people went wild for. So this is one of his most famous photos, and a website said that it was one of the most iconic photos of the modern era. It's Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico, from 1941. And, you know, there was a lot of people who just really like to talk about like the lore behind it when they were talking about like, well, how did he like get to take this like such a perfect photo? And he was like, a photograph is made, not taken. And he described it as an inevitable photograph. Like he was just driving and he saw it and he had to like capture this moment, and then it was like such a famous photograph. And I just think it's a really beautiful photograph. I really enjoy, again, you can see some people. Maybe they're kind of far away, but it looks like there's some people and like all this beautiful like architecture, and then in the background the mountains and the clouds. It just is a really nice balance to it too. I really enjoyed that one. I understand why it's so famous. The last photographer we'll be talking about is Luigi Ghirri, who was a famous Italian painter and photographer. Like, you know, as most there's a lot of artists. He wasn't popular until he died, but he did have like photos. He had a book called Kodachrome, and he had his work was in exhibits, but he really didn't get like famous and like well known until after he died, and like the new color and new topographics movements happened, and they realized that he sort of was contributing to those movements before those even had names and before he even knew what they were. He was a pioneer of color landscapes. Like a lot of, like color photography was a thing before then. It obviously was. But nobody was really taking photographs, like landscape photographs in color. And he really he changed Italian photography, and then as a result changed American photography, as he just was really focused on like the color of things. He has some really cool photographs that are not landscapes, so they're not included in his PowerPoint, but he has one of a woman standing on a map that's really cool with like blue shoes on. He has a lot of very cool color photography that is just very cool. This is not necessarily his like most famous, super famous photograph here. Oh, I didn't talk about the other one. That's fine. But Orbitello, this photograph of two people in the trees, I really like the symmetry of it. It's not quite all symmetrical. It's like a little bit asymmetrical with how the people are sitting. But this is the one from his collection Kodachrome that people, like, they love to bring it up. Like, if you Google him, this photo will come up first. Pretty sure. At least when I Googled him, it came up first. Yeah. Like, the blue of the water is so brilliant. A lot of his photos have the water in it, like Italian shores. And he was so focused on bringing color into his photography and into the world of photography. Still on my phone. Yeah. So this photo that I forgot to talk about of, again, the Italian waters, Salisburgo in 1975. He has other photographs, but I really like this one because of just how like misty it is with all the clouds and like the mountains kind of disappearing into the background and the people there. He also had a lot of people in his work, even if it wasn't like portraits. It was just people as a part of landscapes, which, you know, wasn't as big of an idea before he started taking these photographs. He mostly did painting, I think, but his photographs are amazing. Here's just my little works cited here. Thank you.